Wisdom is said to be the gift of age, and with that wisdom comes a profound desire to surround our grandchildren with warmth, care, and unwavering kindness. We celebrate their triumphs, offer support in difficult times, and strive to always be by their side. Yet, as ancient philosophies teach us, balance is paramount. Unconditional love without established boundaries can lead to a place where our care is no longer valued. If we forgive too much, the lines of what is permissible begin to blur, and with them, respect can fade away. Even those we hold dearest cannot be allowed to do whatever they please if it violates our feelings and our dignity. Unfortunately, many grandparents face a situation where their grandchildren, upon growing older, begin to take them for granted. The loving child who once listened to bedtime stories with wide-eyed wonder suddenly becomes distant, cold, and at times even irritable. Why does this happen? At what point does that warm connection fray? And what can be done to preserve closeness and respect with our grandchildren without sacrificing our own dignity? In this film, we will explore the most common mistakes that can lead to a loss of respect from grandchildren, examine the real stories of elderly people who have faced this problem, and identify which actions must not be overlooked if you wish to maintain a healthy, loving family dynamic. Tatiana Petrovna had always been a devoted grandmother. When her grandson Dima was born, she poured all her love, patience, and care into him from the very first day. She helped her daughter without a second thought for her own time or energy, sitting with Dima when he was small, taking him for walks, reading him fairy tales, and walking him to school. Dima loved his grandmother. He would always run to greet her with a joyful embrace, sharing his small triumphs and sorrows. When he got a bad grade, he would seek refuge behind her, knowing she wouldn't scold but support him. When he was sad, it was her comfort he sought. But over time, everything changed. Teenage friends, new interests, gadgets, all of it gradually pushed his grandmother from the center of his world. Tatiana Petrovna still tried to be there for him, but she noticed with increasing frequency that her presence had become secondary to him. At first, he simply stopped visiting as often. Then, his replies to her calls became short and reluctant. One day, when Tatiana Petrovna came to visit her daughter, Dima didn't even look up from his phone, merely tossing out a curt, "Hey." At the time, she didn't think much of it, assuming he was just tired. But the next time she called, she was met with an irritated, "Oh, Grandma, I'm busy, later." That later was repeated again and again. When they finally did see each other, Dima was nothing like the affectionate boy she once held in her arms. He spoke to her with a cold, detached tone, sometimes with clear annoyance. But the most painful moment for Tatiana Petrovna came on her daughter's birthday. At the celebratory dinner, she instinctively went to pass her grandson a plate of his favorite cutlets, but was met with an exasperated, "Grandma, don't, I'll get it myself." Everyone laughed, but she felt something inside her break. In that moment, she understood that to her grandson, she had become someone who could be ignored. She smiled as always, hiding her feelings, but when she returned home, she couldn't shake the sense of emptiness. At first, she made excuses for him. He's a teenager, he has other concerns. But then came the realization, this wasn't about age. It was a habit of disrespect because no one had ever taught him otherwise. Many grandparents face this. They endure, they justify, they hope things will change. But the truth is, if you don't establish boundaries early on, it will soon be too late. Of course, children grow up and their interests change. But respect isn't about age. It's about upbringing. It is formed in childhood, and if a child doesn't learn to respect their elders from the beginning, they will not learn it in adulthood. So if one day your grandchild responds to you with irritation, even if it seems unintentional, do not remain silent. Calmly, but firmly, you must make it clear that such treatment is unacceptable. Because if you don't protect yourself today, tomorrow they will behave this way not only with you, but with other loved ones as well, with the very people who truly love and care for them. But it isn't only rudeness or indifference that can erode the relationship between generations. There are situations where grandchildren begin to use their grandmother's love and care for their own benefit, not realizing they are turning her into a convenient resource. Manipulation is another serious problem faced by the elderly, and if it is not recognized in time, the consequences can be just as devastating. Maria Semyonovna had been a kind and caring grandmother her entire life. She lived alone, but never felt lonely, because her granddaughter, Katya, was always nearby. From a young age, Katya knew how to get what she wanted. She quickly realized that her grandmother was the kindest person in her life and learned to use it to her advantage. If her mother refused to buy a toy, Katya would go to her grandmother with a carefully crafted look of sadness and say, "Please, Grandma, Mom just doesn't understand how much this means to me." Maria Semyonovna couldn't refuse. After all, this was her granddaughter, her joy, her reason for living. At first, it was toys, then expensive clothes, then money for cafes with friends. Katya wasn't doing anything malicious. She just knew which words to say to get what she wanted. Her grandmother suspected that her granddaughter was being cunning, but she continued to help. They were just small requests, nothing serious. But one day, Maria Semyonovna overheard Katya on the phone. "Don't worry, I'll get the money from my grandma. She always gives it to me if I complain a little," her granddaughter said without a hint of hesitation. Those words pierced her grandmother like a knife. It turned out that all this time, there had been no sincerity, no gratitude, only cold calculation. She thought for a long time about whether to say something. Maybe her granddaughter didn't mean it maliciously. Maybe it was just youthful carelessness. But that day, she decided it was time to draw a line. The next time Katya asked for money, Maria Semyonovna didn't give it to her right away. "Katya, dear, let's talk," she said calmly. "You often ask me for things, but I want you to know that help is not an obligation. It's a choice." At first, Katya laughed, then she looked embarrassed, and finally, she scoffed dismissively. "Oh, Grandma, come on, I was just asking." But Maria Semyonovna stood her ground. "I will always help you because I love you, but love is not a one-way street where one person only takes and the other only gives." Katya left in a huff, and her grandmother was left with a bitter feeling. Many elderly people face this kind of treatment, but are afraid to say no because they don't want to offend their grandchildren. But if manipulation isn't stopped in its tracks, it becomes a habit, and habits form character. A child who learns to manipulate in their youth will carry that behavior into adulthood. They will seek out people who are easy to control and use them for their own gain. That's why this behavior cannot be tolerated. If you feel that your grandchild is playing on your sympathies, saying what you want to hear while pursuing only their own goals, do not stay silent. There's no need to argue or be offended. Simply explain, calmly, that adult relationships are built on honesty. Love is not a game, it must be mutual. But what if a grandchild doesn't just manipulate, but stops noticing their grandmother altogether? When communication with family becomes something optional, and at times entirely unnecessary, indifference from grandchildren is another grave problem faced by the elderly. If not addressed in time, the consequences can be irreversible. Galina Ivanovna always said that her grandchildren were her happiness. She doted on them, baked them the most delicious pies, knitted them warm sweaters, and gave them gifts for no reason at all. When her youngest grandson Sasha was little, he adored his grandmother. He would run to her with every question, proudly show her his school projects, and tell her everything that was happening in his life. She felt needed, and she knew he valued her care and attention. Those moments made her truly happy. But time passed, and Sasha grew up. First, his visits became less frequent. Then he stopped answering her calls. And then Galina Ivanovna suddenly realized she hadn't seen her grandson in several months. She missed him but didn't want to be intrusive. However, the moment Sasha got into trouble and urgently needed money, he immediately remembered his grandmother. He called, his voice suddenly warm and affectionate, and asked how she was doing. But it was obvious, he only needed one thing. Galina Ivanovna, of course, helped. She couldn't refuse her grandson, even though she knew he had only thought of her for his own benefit. A few days later, she decided to run an experiment. If she didn't call first, would he write on his own? 2 weeks passed. Silence. A month went by. Not a single message. It was then she understood that for him, she had become just a convenient resource, not a beloved family member. The thought was painful, but crucial. She recalled all the times her grandson had reached out only when he needed something. She had made excuses for him: school, work, youth. But now she saw the truth. It wasn't a lack of time, but a habit of taking her care for granted. She decided to change the situation. The next time Sasha called and asked for money, Galina Ivanovna, for the first time in her life, said no. There was a pause on the line. Then her grandson said curtly, "Fine," and hung up. He didn't call for several months after that, and that was the final confirmation for her. He didn't need her. He needed her help. Of course it hurt, but at least now she knew the truth. Many elderly people find themselves in this situation. They are loved only when it is convenient. But this isn't the fault of one generation. It's a dynamic that is formed within the family. Children become accustomed to unconditional care, but not to reciprocating it. What can be done? First and foremost, do not be afraid to set boundaries. If your grandchild communicates with you only when they need something, try saying no just once and see if they stick around. But even more important is to talk about your feelings, calmly and without accusations. It means a lot to me when you just call to ask how I'm doing. I want to know that connecting with me is important to you, not just when you need help. These simple words can change more than a dozen reproaches. Because in the end, grandchildren grow up, but the relationships they build with their family will stay with them for a lifetime. If they learn to respect and value you, they will value other people too. And in that way, the world will become just a little bit kinder. But what happens when it's not just indifference? What if grandchildren gradually lose their connection not only with their grandparents, but with the entire family? When they cease to see anything meaningful in their relatives and begin to neglect family traditions. A disregard for family values is another problem that often goes unnoticed. But over time, it can lead to a complete breakdown of the bond between generations. Lydia Vasilyevna had always been the keeper of her family's traditions. For her, family always came first, and she did everything to make her loved ones feel like a unified whole. Every New Year, she gathered everyone around the table. At Easter, she baked cakes from an old family recipe. For birthdays, she prepared the favorite dishes of her children and grandchildren. She lovingly preserved old photo albums, told family stories, and passed down the wisdom of generations. When her grandson was young, he eagerly participated in all the family holidays. He loved listening to stories of his grandmother's youth and looking at the old photographs with interest. But as the years went by, everything changed. Her grandson appeared at home less often, and then he stopped coming to holidays altogether. At first, he used school as an excuse, then work, and eventually he just stopped responding to invitations. When Lydia Vasilyevna once again invited him to a family celebration, he replied curtly, "Grandma, I don't have time for that. Who even cares about those old traditions anymore?" Those words cut her deeply. It meant that everything she held so dear was meaningless to her grandson. She could have been offended, withdrawn into herself, and stopped inviting him altogether. But instead, she decided to try a different approach. The next time her grandson stopped by for some other reason, she didn't scold or complain. Instead, she took out an old photo album and opened it in front of him. "Look, here's your mother as a child, and here you are, with the very same eyes as your grandfather." At first, her grandson waved it away. "Yeah, Grandma, I remember." But then his gaze caught on one of the photos. "Where is this? Is that the park you used to take me to?" Lydia Vasilyevna smiled. "Yes, we fed the ducks there. You were so happy that day." Her grandson paused for a moment, then unexpectedly asked, "Grandma, do you remember how we built a snowman in the yard?" That small moment was the beginning of a return. Sometimes children and grandchildren forget how important it is to maintain a connection with their family. They think that conversations, visits, and traditions can be postponed. But if we don't remind them of the value of these things, they will indeed fade into the past. What can be done? Don't pressure, don't reproach. Instead, gently involve them. Recall good memories, share stories, invite them without coercion. Even if they don't respond immediately, the seeds will be planted. And one day, they will remember that family is not just a formality, but the very thing that makes us who we are. Unfortunately, however, there are cases where it's not just about indifference to family values. Sometimes, grandchildren don't just forget about their grandmothers, They begin to see them as a convenient source of material support. Financial dependency, using a grandmother for personal gain, is another problem that destroys trust and turns a warm relationship into a cold transaction. Maria Sergeyevna worked as a teacher her whole life. In retirement, she lived modestly, but always tried to help her family. She wasn't one to complain, and believed that caring for her loved ones was her duty. Her grandson, Andrei, knew from childhood that his grandmother was kind and would always help. When he was little, she bought him toys, then expensive clothes, and later gave him pocket money. At first, the requests were infrequent and modest, but over time, Andrei started turning to his grandmother more and more often. "Grandma, can you lend me some? My paycheck is delayed," he would say, and without hesitation, she would give him her savings. A short time would pass, and he would ask again, "I'm short for my textbooks," or "I need money for car repairs." She believed she was helping him, that she was doing a good deed. But one day, Maria Sergeyevna realized something was wrong. Andrei usually only called when he needed something. When she tried to just talk, he would forget about her for weeks. So she decided to test him. What would happen if she didn't offer help first? Andrei didn't show up for a long time, and then he called again. "Grandma, can you help me out? I need nay urgently." This time she gathered her strength and for the first time in her life answered, "No." There was silence on the line. "Why?" her grandson asked, annoyed. "Because I want you to visit me, not just for money," she said calmly. Andrei sighed with displeasure. "Fine, I'll figure it out myself." He didn't call for several weeks after that. Maria Sergeyevna understood that all this time her care had been taken as a given, and she herself had become not a beloved relative, but simply a convenient source of money. Many elderly people face this, but they are afraid to refuse, fearing they will push their grandchildren away. But the truth is that help must be conscious and mutual. If someone only remembers their grandmother when they need something, that's not care, it's exploitation. To preserve respect, it's vital to set boundaries in time and make it clear that support is not an obligation, but a kind gesture. But financial dependency is just one form of devaluation. Sometimes grandchildren not only use their grandmother but simply fail to notice her care at all. A lack of gratitude and the devaluation of care is another pain that elderly people face. If it goes unnoticed, the relationship can be irrevocably destroyed. Vera Nikolaevna always said that happiness was being remembered. She didn't expect much, just to hear kind words from her grandson, to get a call not only on holidays, but just because. She had cared for him since he was a child, baking him pies, knitting woolen socks, and sending him little treats. For her, this was an expression of love. When her grandson was little, he rejoiced in her care. But as he grew older, his attitude began to change. Calls became rare, visits became formal, and then they disappeared altogether. Vera Nikolaevna still tried. She would write messages asking how he was. He would reply dryly, "I'm fine, Grandma." And sometimes he would forget to reply at all. But the most hurtful moment came when she decided to give him a gift. Knowing his birthday was approaching, she chose a beautiful woolen scarf she had knitted with her own hands. When she presented it to him, her grandson didn't even unwrap it. He just said, "Oh, Grandma, you didn't have to. I didn't ask for this." The phrase struck her like a blow. For the first time in a long while, she felt unneeded. He hadn't even looked at what she had lovingly made for him. She smiled, but inside something broke. That evening, she couldn't sleep. The words, "I didn't ask for this," echoed in her mind. It meant her care was perceived as something taken for granted. She decided she would no longer impose herself. She stopped being the first to write, call, or offer help. Several weeks passed, but her grandson never took the initiative. It was then that Vera Nikolaevna realized that for all these years, she had been pouring her warmth into him, but had never taught him gratitude. She wasn't expecting gifts. All she needed was simple attention and a kind word. But gratitude is not just politeness. It is the ability to value another person's care. If this is not taught in childhood, a person will treat others the same way in their adult life. And then Vera Nikolaevna began to wonder, who taught her grandson to treat his loved ones this way? Why didn't he understand that care requires warmth in return? The influence of parents' upbringing on the attitude of grandchildren towards their grandparents is another crucial topic that is rarely considered. If a child is not shown an example of respect for the older generation from childhood, they will simply never learn it. Next, we will examine the role that parents play in this and how their behavior shapes their children's relationships with their grandparents. Parents play a paramount role in a child's upbringing and in shaping their attitude toward the older generation. This lesson is taught not through words, but through actions and the examples children see every day. When parents show through their own behavior that communication with grandparents is important, children learn this as a natural part of life. However, if parents allow their children to be disrespectful towards their grandparents, this becomes the norm. The child doesn't realize that such an attitude is wrong until they face the consequences later in life. In one family story, a mother never explained the value of communicating with her own mother to her son. He often ignored his grandmother's calls and showed no interest in her life. The mother, preoccupied with her own affairs, paid no mind. She thought her son would figure it out when he grew up. Over time, the relationship between the grandson and grandmother became more and more distant. He stopped visiting her, and calls became a rarity. His grandmother, who had lovingly raised him, did not receive what she expected in return: respect and attention. Only when the grandson became an adult did he realize that his relationship with his grandmother was not like that of his peers with their relatives. But by then, it was too late. He had grown accustomed to ignoring her feelings and not valuing her care. The root of this attitude was that his mother had never explained the importance of their relationship. She had not set an example of how to communicate with family. The son learned not to value his grandmother because she was not a priority for his own parents. Herein lies the central problem. If parents do not teach their children to respect their elders, it can lead to indifference in the future. Respect is passed down through generations. Parents are the role models from whom children learn how to behave with grandparents. If parents believe that communication with the elderly is unimportant, they pass this behavioral model on to their children. And ultimately, these children grow up with the conviction that the care and attention of older people have no value. The conclusion is clear. The education of respect must begin with the parents. They must show through their own behavior how important it is to value loved ones, to respect them, and to give them attention. Only in this way can a healthy model of attitude towards the older generation be formed. As we think about the future, it is important to remember that we as parents can influence how our children will treat their grandparents. This is our choice and our responsibility. In conclusion, it is vital to remember that relationships with grandparents are not just obligatory family ties, but a precious value that requires attention, respect, and care. Respect for the older generation is passed down through the family, and we as adults must set the example for our children. Do not forget this in your daily life, for the support and love of our elders are the foundation of family harmony and our collective happiness. If you found this film useful and would like more discussions like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. It is important for us to know how you maintain relationships with your loved ones. Your support in the comments motivates us to create new, interesting films to share important topics with you. Stay with us, because only together can we make our world a little kinder.